Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things back again. You know what? I nearly said the Agile Revolution there. And the reason being is I've got the fantastic pleasure today of interviewing my co-host from a podcast that I also work on, which is the Agile Revolution. So I might be a little bit split brain today. Craig Smith, how are you?
Should I go greetings and salutations, Tony, the way you introduced the Agile Revolution?
You're welcome to if you like, Craig. Look,
G'day,
for
Tony.
all those that don't know, introduce yourself, Craig.
Well, I'm Craig. Been around this for as long as Tony, just a tad more hair, but not much. So how long have you been at this now, Tony? 20 something, 20 plus years.
I like to say
Uh,
I'm in my third decade. That's the easiest way to say it now.
there you go. I like that. I'm going to steal that. Um, yeah, so been in this world for a little while. As Tony said, co-host a podcast with him since I think it's gone to our 10th or 11th anniversary now. We've passed the 10 years working on that podcast, so a little longer than this one that you're doing, Tony. You didn't have enough to do, so you've gone for a second podcast. Up until very recently, I was a director of the Agile Alliance, International Agile Alliance, and I'm the global agility lead currently at SoftEd.
Yeah, and the reason I got you on was because you have been in the agile community for a very long time, and you have been working with the Agile Alliance across the world. So you've got some really good views of how things are moving and changing across the world. And we will get to the podcast later on, but the one I want to talk a little bit about is the Agile Alliance, as you were a director there, and talking about where that's headed and where you see the changes since, let's face it, since the pandemic hit.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the Agile Alliance was a group formed by the signatories of the manifesto, really because they wanted a community to continue that conversation. So, whilst none of those luminaries are involved in that to this date, and there is a sort of a separation between the manifesto and the alliance as the community. It started really by bringing people together, and so most people know the Agile Alliance for its big Agile 20XX conference that runs in the US, usually around the end of July timeframe every year. So last year was in Nashville, this year it's in Orlando. So that's what a lot of people know the Alliance for. But really, what the Alliance is for is it's a non-profit organization to help the Agile community grow. By helping others. As the Agile Manifesto starts, it's the same type of thing. It's a place for the community to meet. So it does a lot of things, not just the conference, but has member initiatives. Any member of the Agile Alliance can propose an initiative, and the funds that we have, which for the most part do come from running conferences and events, we put that back in to move the community forward. And yeah, it's whilst it's a North American based organization, it is a global organization. It has affiliates in Brazil and New Zealand and initiatives and events that run all over the world.
So talk to me a little bit about the changes you've seen, because you've been in it. How long have you been a member in it now, or a director, Craig?
Well, as a member, I first joined the Alliance back in about 2008, I think, just as a member, and done a few different roles. I run a few initiatives. I am one of the directors of the Community Group Support Initiative, which helps community groups around the world and meetups. And the other one is the Agile Coaching Ethics Initiative, which I work on with Alex Slowly and Shane Hasty. And last year, the year before, we published Agile Coaching Ethics paper, both the actual ethics themselves as well as scenarios for people to follow. But for the last 6 years, and my term just ended at the end of 2022, I've been a director to help in helping in running and moving the Agile Alliance along. And so I think your original question is what's changed since the
Yes.
pandemic. Obviously, that was a time that was difficult for everybody, but as an organization that relies on conferences, it turned from being how do we grow the Agile community just to how do we keep the Agile community alive, and how do we keep ourselves as an organization alive. And so since that, last year, being able to get back to an in-person conference, still with the cloud of COVID around the outside of it, but was a successful conference. Again, planning for the conference this year in Orlando, and now looking for ways to take Agile forward. I think that's what was one of my parting messages to my fellow board members who are continuing on is, I'd like us to see us to be a little bold and be part of the conversation, perhaps a little more than we have been over the last few years.
Yeah, and just while I remember, a quick shout out to Shane. We had him on the cast to talk about ethics, and Alex, who's a good friend of ours as well. So, hi, if you're watching, you should be, because Craig's on here, right? And he's talking about you. Interestingly enough, with the Agile Alliance, it's a big boiling pot, though, right? You've got a lot when you talk about a global organization. So how do you work out, how does it sort of surface to the top what's the most important, and what's the best bang for buck, and how you get that hit to help right across the world? Because I'd imagine that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to realize is that, and when a lot of people see the conference run, for example, because again, that's often the public face, the organization itself is really only a handful of staff. So we were lucky enough to get Teresa, a new managing director, who started last year, who is really just gung ho, knows how to run public organizations, new to the Agile field, but very keen to learn. And she has a small staff. She has a few people on web and some assistants, but that's it. So it's not as if there's a big set of consultants or even training people sitting behind the scenes. Yes, we do employ people to help us run the conference. So we have a partner that helps us in the conference organization, but the rest of the organization is run by volunteers. So the conference, a lot of the conference, we call them purple shirts at the main conference. They're volunteers. The member initiatives that I mentioned before, I did those because it was just something that, so we mentioned ethics. Right? Shane, Alex, and I, we're just members of the Alliance and doing that because it's something that we believed in, and was a banner that we could do that in, that wasn't affiliated with any training organization or any consulting organization. Even though people there represent different things, it's a banner where we can say this is something that we're giving to the world, and it's not owned by anybody. And I talk about us three, by the way. There's been about 60, 70 people that have done the hard yards in putting that particular initiative together. So, whilst we're the ones that often stand up and talk about it, there's a lot of great people behind that initiative, and the same with all the other work that the Alliance does. How do we prioritize? Well, we work in an agile way. So the highest priority things, the things that add value, they're the things that go. And when you go into a period like COVID, that we had to make some very hard decisions of some sacred cows and things, and make some hard decisions to go, we're going to have to stop those things for now. And now, as we start to come out of that, now it's the time where the Alliance will start to pick some of those things up, and perhaps pick some new things that that might be of high value as well.
Yeah, I think it's also important to mention, you mentioned it sort of through the thing, but Agile Alliance is non-denominational. What I mean by that is it's not lined up against any framework. It doesn't care whether you're Scrum or you're SAFe or whatever that be. You can get involved in it.
We call it the big tent. It's a big tent of agility, and essentially, if you are truly agile, if you if you use the manifesto at your heart, then you're welcome to this community, because it doesn't matter which denomination or which religion you follow or any of those types of things. Everybody is welcome, and sometimes that gets criticism, because some people don't like that we invite the folks wearing the blue shirts to the conference, or whatever that might be. Again, or the red shirts. That's the one you look out for in Star Trek, isn't it? The red shirt.
Yeah, that is the one, right? It's a good segue, though. It's a good segue. So, just sort of moving off the Agile Alliance, but moving into the different types of agility and non-denominational. Hey, one of the things you've become known for, and I know the background of how it came about, but it'll be interesting for other people to hear, is your talk, which is 40 agile methods in 40 minutes. Of course, the joke is, if I gave you 60 minutes, you could probably do 100. I'm challenging you now. But talk about that, because that talks. And if you haven't seen it, Google it. You'll see it come up immediately, because it's a fantastic graphic that was done by Lynn Kazali at the time. It's been monitored around Opstyle, and everybody else is borrowed with attribution. But Craig, talk to us a little bit about how it came about and how you've just recently upgraded it, right, or updated it.
Yeah, and thanks, Link Azaley's given us an updated graphic as well, which is fantastic. Yeah, how it came about? It'd be remiss not to mention our other colleague Renee Troughton, who really was a little bit of the inspiration behind this as an idea. She was toying around with the idea of how can we see what the not the advantages, disadvantages, but what sort of sits behind each of these frameworks, and she was trying to create a bit of a model behind that, which you can see in some of the early versions of the talk. We did use it there, but probably didn't add as much value. And in fact, as I look at it now, it would have been a hard thing to keep there. But we sort of talked about, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we actually just presented that in some way? And that's, and then I sort of, was looking for a name and thought, how about we set ourselves a challenge? And, you were there, I think, at the original running of it. And I remember Henrik Nyberg, who was keynoting at the time, sort of came in. He goes, I was told to come see this. He said, this is either going to be the best thing ever or the biggest train wreck I've ever seen on the planet. He at the end came up and said, wasn't a train wreck. So that was that was good. But the idea was really, the impetus behind when I first presented, which was at the Scrum gathering here in Australia, was to essentially say to the Scrum community, hey, Scrum's great, but there's 39 other things that we probably should be thinking about. And it was really based on Alistair Coburn's oath of non-allegiance, that we shouldn't restrict our thinking just to one framework, and not ignore our heritage and other things, because I think we take it for granted. You and I were around when we were making a lot of stuff up, and we were running off one or two books because that's all we had. It's the flip side now in 2022, right? Third decade later, as you talked about before, we were looking for one book and one expert. Right now, there's a million experts and a million books. It's the opposite problem. But the same thing still applies. When you go to an Agile Fundamentals course, why do they talk about things like planning poker or Moscow or cross-functional teams? Because none of those things are directly mentioned in, say, something like Scrum, for example. But if you would go to a Scrum training course, just to use that as an example, they would absolutely get mentioned. But where did they come from? And if you understand their heritage and where they came from, which is the early work of people like Alistair Coburn and the early work of things like DSDM and some of those other models. But then we have a strong relationship to the lean community. So the work of both the Toyota system, but also people like the Poppendieks, who were able to take that and turn it into new sorts of work. And then in more recent times, the flow system, which has been a more modern variant on how to bring that into organizations. Again, are they frameworks you would use on their own? Possibly not, but are they things that are building blocks to solve problems? Absolutely. So that was really the intent behind it. Originally, built in 2015, and as I said, updated last year because a lot had changed in the time frame. So a lot of new additions, including RAF, I must say, which is in there at number 39.
For those of you who are unaware, of course, Remote Agility Framework is where I come from these days. And
it's the logo right over his left shoulder.
That one there, just in case you didn't know. So yeah, interesting enough, I've got to stop the cast for one moment and go bingo, because Craig and I have an ongoing joke. And for 2023, you're the first one who mentioned Alistair Coburn in a cast.
I did, but you prompted me in that direction, so still your fault.
So when you were updating the 40 Agile methods, obviously that means you moved some out, put some in. Talk to me about that. What made the grade, what didn't make the grade, and how did you make that decision?
Well, even the 40 that are in there, Tony, I mean, as I said, there's actually probably about 60, 70 in there. I've never actually properly counted them, but because there's something number 17 is actually someone's got 3 or 4 things on the page. So there's actually a lot more than 40 in there. They're just grouped into 40 headings, I guess. But even then, there was a lot of things that I would have liked to have been in there on the cutting room floor, even in the early versions. Things like in the foundational frameworks, I used to have feature-driven design in there, which was from our part of the world. It was an Australian early adopter, still very important. And I got a lot of people say to me, "Why isn't Evo in there?" Which was one of the original, Tom Gilbin and his work. And so, I had to make tough decisions and go, okay, well, in that case, feature-driven design dropped and Evo went in, and it was the same in the updates. Some of them had actually gone away. They just weren't as prominent as they were before, and weren't as relevant. But in the early version, we didn't have things like business agility. Business agility wasn't really a thing 10 years ago. That's one example. Design thinking, it was around, but is a lot more prevalent in agile teams than it was 10 years ago. So bringing those things in meant that we had to make decisions come out. Plus, just in the last 7 to 10 years, there's been a whole bunch of new frameworks that didn't exist, that popped up. Scrum at Scale didn't exist when we did or at least it didn't exist in a well publicized form when we did the first version of it. Things like Agile 2, Fast Agile, Flow that I mentioned before, are all things that have popped up, just in the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's become a fast moving landscape. Sometimes I think not for the best, because there's a dilution. There's a dilution of what we understand as agility. And I look at some of these, and I'm not going to poke holes in any particular one, but I'm just going to say, broad brushstrokes there, that some of these latch onto certain attributes of agility. And there are people who say, well, the manifesto is cooked, and I have a fairly strong opinion on that, Agile is the thinking, it's the philosophy, right? Agility is the outcome that allows you to create things like flow and etc. So, and still a lot of organizations haven't managed to actually do that properly yet. So to say the manifesto is cooked is, in my mind, is a little bit short-sighted, Craig.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you, Tony. And I think, the way I look at it, and scaling frameworks are a good example of this. And I know that was possibly where you were going if you've ever listened to the Agile Revolution podcast. But if you look at all of the scaling frameworks, and regardless of your affiliation, to me, they're all still in beta phase. All of them are based on somebody's view or someone's experience. I mean, we talked to Dean Leffingwell many years ago on the podcast, and he said that to us, right? That SAFe was really just him communicating, writing down something that had worked in a previous organization. It's of course morphed and had lots more people across it and all those type of things over the years, but it's just a viewpoint of what it look like. And sometimes that framework may be the exact thing your organization needs. But a lot of the time, there is a part of it, and it's not about, I'm fully in on Scrum, or I'm fully in on Kanban, or I'm fully in on SAFe, or I'm fully in on design thinking. It's what is the right tool for the job. And sometimes what these will give you is some direction in order to do that. But I think if you're striving to, have just, the one thing implemented, you're doing the wrong thing. No one gets a Mickey Mouse badge for full implementation of SAFe. What they get is what you get is kudos when you're actually delivering better product, faster, better quality, and that's what these do. And that was really the intent behind the talk, was to go, when you start to hit a problem, whatever direction your organization has gone in, here's where you might find the ideas, right? So don't discount those other methods.
And I think that was a driver behind. So whilst there's that particular thing that we talk about, the other one that you and I have delivered a couple of times. So, and I know you continue to deliver. So, we've become a little bit known for that, is fail agility, the talk. And when we were putting that together, I remember succinctly the driver wasn't so much the fail in terms of failing. It was first attempt in learning. I know that's the kitsch thing, but we actually meant it in that way. And it was about exactly what you're talking about, that if you're trying to do just that, it's not going to get you where you need to go. True business agility is about adopting Agile in the right way for all the different parts of the sum of the whole. And for those that are listening, Craig and I, we were part of one of the premier Agile actual transformations, not transitions, in Australia at the time when we learnt many of those. We didn't really have a word for it then. We didn't know it was called business agility. What are your thoughts, Craig?
No, we were just doing agility and let's apply it to the business. And if we had been smart, we would have put those two words together, Tony.
We would have made a fortune.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right that and yeah, you mentioned the fellows you're talking. And by the way, it's never the same. When I delivered a few times in house, people have sort of looked through and went, can you deliver that?" It's not the same without my mate next to me. I usually stick your ugly mug up on the screen and say, "Yeah, wish you were here." In the same way, it's not the same that Renee's not with us right now when we're doing a podcast. And I also mentioned her when I do the 40 Agile methods. But yeah, you're right. It's the this is such a big problem, right? This is not just implementing agile. This is how does an organization do work? And the reality is that business agility was the missing link because a lot of organizations just focus in on the IT or the digital part of their organization, but that's only a small slither. The old water scrum fall, which we've mentioned 1,000 times on our other podcast, is that if you only do the bit in the middle, right, the scrum or the agile part, if you don't think about from where it starts and how you get it to people, and then how you get it into the hands of a user, and actually the cycle time that it takes to do that, then you've only solved 1/3 of the problem.
It's an interesting conundrum because one of the things that in the last few years I've seen a large prevalence of it. Again, I'm not going to point the finger, but I'm sure anyone listening to this will know there are some large consultancies out there that are using the cookie cutter, and they're coming along with this blueprint and they're trying to shove it over the top of an organization. And this is not just something in Australia, this is worldwide. I'm seeing it, right? Because I obviously work worldwide. And it doesn't matter whether it's a particular, shall we say, music services type frame of reference, or it could be a different type of frame of reference. They've all got their own. But the reality of it is that I've not seen, they keep me in business, actually. That's the reality, is because I even have to keep coming in and looking and going, okay, how do we fix this? And I wonder, as the Agile community, what we do about that.
Yeah, well, yet another framework's not really the answer to that, but continuing to share and communicate those ideas, and in doing that, I mean, again, just point to RAF as a good example of that, right? There's a problem that needs to be solved. Build something around that. Is that the right solution or the entire solution to the problem? I'm sure even you would say that no, there's work to be done there, and that's the thing. And whether that is ultimately the RAF framework that shows that, or whether that is then building on top of something else that somebody else solves. But also, as you solve a problem, the old ways that we did things also don't always necessarily hold up. The one I like to use that demonstration for that is estimation. Just because we talked about story points and planning poker back in the mid 2000s doesn't mean that in 2022 that's the right way, right? And they were building blocks, and so we've moved on in those conversations about how we attack that. Problem is that some of our organizations are actually still back in the 1990s, right? Some have spent a lot of time and they go, hang on, we just spent a bunch of time doing this agile stuff you told us in 2012. What are you saying now we have to do something again? It's because, like everything, the world moves fast and we find better ways of doing it, and that will come from all different sources. And that's our real challenge as a community, is how do we share those things, but how do we, instead of stopping and poking holes in them, how do we actually, because all of them have, some benefit, some, greatness, whether it be the music company. I mean, getting people to talk about how you structure teams, right? We're talking about Spotify for those who don't get there, but how we talk about teams, I think, has been a real boon for Henrik Nyberg and those at Spotify who shared that way of working, not copying it, but actually going, we could set teams up in a different way. You can look at the Scaled Agile framework and go, they help progress things. Like the idea of talking about a train, is really, how do we coordinate our work? Do you have to set up a train and do PI planning? If that's right for you, sure, but maybe not. But I think what it's done is it started the communication, and that's, as I've maybe it's just because I've gotten older, I appreciate all that work and the way it is, and that's why it's not just one method.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And my old hobby horse, and I'm going to say it again today, don't copy somebody else's way of working that they've used in their organization, regardless of who's telling you to do that. Because what you get is, you not only get their way of working, but you get all the problems that they had, and you add it to your problems, and then you have twice as many problems. And that's not where you want to go. What you need to do is have the way of working that actually works for your organization. And I can only stress that. And the other one I want to pick up on, you said, some organisations are still coming forward into the agility frame now because they're adopting, right, the laggards, I suppose you might want to call them. But the interesting thing is some of the old problems that we used to see are popping up, and some of the old cures are still the right cures, right? So, things like velocity matching. If that is something that is reared its head again in many, many different organizations at the moment, and probably one of the most divisive and wrong things that you can possibly do in any organization. Are you seeing that kind of thing, Craig?
Oh yeah, and we could sit here and roll off a list of 100 of them. And I think it's just, as I said, just because you learnt it one way. The one of the things I see is that it's like anything in life. This is still a fairly new field. This is something that Josh Kurievsky talks about in his Joy of Agility talk book, just released just recently. That this is still a very young field. You just got to look at technologies that are, just starting to take off. I mean, the whole world's talking about things like ChatGPT at the moment. For example, like those things have, have impacts, but we're only at the still at the starting point of things like AI. Agility is just the same. The way our organizations, need to evolve is still on a journey that has a lot to play out. How long it is, I'm not going to predict that. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the world? But we're not at the end of this. We're still, somewhat we're still developing things, and so that's the challenge for us. For people like us, we were around at the start of it, so we know the history behind why something was done. The problem is the more you start to filter this down, and it just becomes read this book or sit on this 3-day class, that's when you lose some of those. And that again was the point behind this, is just because I tell you that cross-functional teams are a thing, or just because I tell you that building quality in is a thing, you ask the questions about that. I've been around long enough to know how it used to work, the stages that it went through. We've tried things that have worked, things that haven't. We had that luxury back in the early days. Now, because it's become more pervasive, people are saying, hey, we just got to start working agile and we need it done yesterday. And so it's a lot harder for those new practitioners into our field to, they don't get the time to experiment with things, in the way that we had. You talked about the transformation that we worked on in the early days. A lot of that was just making stuff up and finding the best way through it. And as you talked about before, right? First attempt in learning, that fail fast type mentality. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of that because it's like, no, go read these 16 books or go and talk to these experts. So knowing a little bit about why things are the way they are and still allowing yourself time to experiment, I think is super important.
Yeah, I agree. And if I'd say anything else, if you got nothing else out of what Craig's been saying, don't tie yourself to a denomination. Scrum has its uses, but if there's something we learned in what we were doing, was that Scrum worked in certain parts of our organization, but we had to actually add in extreme programming, or we had to add in Kanban to it. You have to go to your toolkit and get the right things. And if you just tie yourself to that one denomination, then you're really limiting yourself. And I think if you get nothing else out of what Craig's been saying, not that he didn't say a lot of other real wise things, but that for me is a real takeaway.
Agile is the journey, not the destination, and that journey will require you to drive down different roads.
Yeah, correct. We're getting close to the end of our time, Craig. Unfortunately, it goes quick, unfortunately. Let's talk about the Agile Revolution podcast, because we haven't mentioned references. So I'll just, get that out here. So we started podcasting, in 2011, when nobody else, there literally wasn't, maybe one or two were doing it. Now everybody's got a podcast. We've been a bit quiet, my friend. And you were saying to me that we're about to fire a few new ones out.
Yeah. So we've cranked up the engine again, and so you should be seeing new content coming your way soon.
So if you want something that's a little bit audio and not too abysmal, rather than visual and abysmal, you can listen to the Agile Revolution at theagilerevolution.com. So I'll just get that plug in anyway. So
Take a look at this, Tony. There's a reason why our history is in audio.
Very true. And hi to Renee. Yep, we will get Renee on the cast as well. Look, we are right at the end of our time, Craig. It's been fantastic to have you on. How do people get in touch with you? How can people get involved with anything that you've been talking about today? I'll just chat with you. I know that you also are involved in the Brisbane Agile meetup as well. Let people know.
Yeah, so many ways. So we talked about the Agile Alliance before. If you want to check out the Agile Alliance, become a member, see all the good initiatives and things, agilealliance.org is where you'll find them. The Agile Revolution, theagilerevolution.com is where you'll find us there, or on the socials at the Agile Podcast. If you want to send me all my personal musings, which is Agile and just other random stuff as well, craigsmith.id.au, and you can find me at SoftEd if you need any professional help. That's softed.com.
Excellent. Well, it's been fantastic having you on again, my friend. If you're listening to this and you really enjoyed this, please do the thing, like, subscribe, so we can keep this going. And
Two thumbs up.
yeah, thumbs up. That's it. So you keep in touch with all the new stuff. Join our Remote AF community. Just go to remoteaf.co, click the community button. You'll find a community on Circle there who are really invested and involved in remote/hybrid/sync and talking and working all of that. Craig, been fantastic to have you on all the remote things today.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me on the second best Agile podcast out there.
And on that note, thanks, Craig.